South East Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
I'm now joined on the line by Lucinda Creighton of Vulcan Consulting. Good morning, Lucinda, and thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Karl.
Lucinda, last year, after almost 9 years of representing the Dublin-based South constituency, you lost your seat in Dáil Éireann. What impact did this result have in your life?
Well, I suppose, in a sense, when you're a politician, you always have to be prepared for the possibility of losing your seat. So, I wasn't shell-shocked or anything like it. But of course, it's like losing any job. You worry about your financial security, about your future, about your family. And so all of that really was what kind of was at the fore of my mind. I don't think I had much time to think about a bruised ego or anything like that. It was more, right, okay, how do I get on with things and what will I do next? And that was really my priority.
So in April 2016, just 2 months after the election result, you founded Vulcan Consulting. What is Vulcan Consulting and where did the idea for this business originate from?
So I founded the company, I suppose, not really being fully sure of what I was going to do or whether I would pursue, the establishment of my company as a kind of a fully fledged business. So I set it up on the basis that I thought I might do some consulting initially before I really kind of decided what I wanted to do. And I guess I spent a few months talking to a lot of people, looking at job opportunities that were coming up. And I pretty much decided within a matter of months that I didn't particularly want to go in-house into any firm. I didn't want to go back to the law library. I'm a barrister by profession. And, I liked the idea of a new challenge, being my own boss and trying to create something new. And I saw kind of a niche in the market, which was to advise companies on the whole political process and the policy-making process in Brussels, something that I'm extremely familiar with. I've really specialised in all through my political career. And so I decided I'd give that a shot. And that's really how it all came to be.
So typically, who is your target client for Vulcan Consulting service offering?
It really is a broad spectrum. I suppose I've ended up focusing a lot on financial services, but it's not exclusively financial services. So I would work with clients across a range of sectors. I've worked with pharmaceutical companies, I've worked with chemical companies, I've worked with food companies and companies in the area of financial services. And I also do some work with some NGOs as well. So it's really broad. And I guess what they all have in common is that they are generally large organisations, multinationals, a lot of US organisations that are looking at the EU policy-making process, and they find it slightly complicated, slightly mysterious, and they need help in devising strategies around how to engage with it, how to influence it, and how to prepare for changes that are coming down the tracks. And that's really what we specialise in.
Talk me through that process that you bring your clients through.
At the moment, we're dealing a lot with Brexit. So it's the kind of, the what-ifs of Brexit. How will it impact on my company? Whether it's visa restrictions potentially in the UK, recruitment, whether it's potential tariffs being imposed for companies, again, that are either exporting into the UK or producing in the UK, potential changes to taxation, VAT down the line, and obviously currency volatility and helping companies prepare for and insulate themselves against currency volatility, which is of course difficult. So it just depends on the company itself, what their kind of makeup is, what their exposure is, how big the UK is in their sort of overall global trading patterns, and preparing for the worst case scenario and then working backwards, if you like. That's sort of on Brexit. But on other issues, I've worked with American clients on, regulatory changes that are coming from the political process in Brussels that will potentially impact on distribution of goods across the whole of the European Union, helping them devise strategies around how they engage with individual member state governments, how they engage with the European institutions, the Commission, the Council, the Parliament. And obviously that's pretty big and broad, but it's very important often to companies as they prepare for major changes.
Now, we've often heard the term lobbying, but how does lobbying work at European level?
There are restrictions. I don't really lobby as such. I just advise companies on how they approach it. But it's lobbying it's like anything. It's about engaging with the right people at the right time, helping them to understand your concerns, and letting them know that, it might be a bigger issue than simply just for you or your company, but actually across the whole sector. And you have to identify the people who are likely to be sympathetic to that. It depends on the issue, it depends on the sector, it depends on in the European context, it depends on the member states which might be most impacted, and building a plan around that.
From somebody that spent a lot of time in Europe, how complex is it?
Well, to me, it's not complex at all, but I think if you're not used to the process and the way the institutions interact with each other, it can seem very, very complex. Like a lot of I would work a lot with US clients, and they're used to, going to Washington. They're also used to a political system where if you spend a lot of money backing a particular party or a particular candidate, you're more likely to get the sort of outcome that you want. It doesn't work like that anymore in Europe. If ever it did, it's much more restricted. You can't just throw money at a political party or a particular politician because of all of the restrictions, which I think are welcome. It's the right approach. So you have to be a lot more clever in terms of you have to build a persuasive case. And you actually have to demonstrate that what you're arguing for is in the public good, in the public interest, or that the consequences of a change that perhaps you're unhappy with would be so devastating it could wipe out an industry or a particular sector. So you have to be much more clever, and you have to build public support. You have to build an understanding in a way that you may not if you're operating in a different jurisdiction. And certainly I find that with US companies, they just aren't used to the dynamic of all of these different institutions, how they interact with each other, and they need a lot of help understanding that.
And Lucinda, how accessible are the decision makers in Europe? Very
accessible. So I would say the Commission, anytime there's a new policy initiative, a new regulation on the horizon, the European Commission is the body that institutes new legislation. They're the only institution that can do that. And they tend to engage widely with industry, with NGOs, with civil society. They set up task forces. They put out calls for submissions. So it's not as though it's a closed shop. They want input a lot of the time. They want the expertise that comes sometimes from the private sector, and they need to understand it. That's the best form of policy making. I'm not necessarily policy making that's sort of dictated to or overly or unduly influenced by the private sector, but that listens to it, understands it. You often hear business people saying that people in government don't understand their concerns, they don't understand the impact of taxation or certain restrictions or red tape. So it's really important, and actually the European Commission are very good at that. I would say that they do engage, they do listen. Now, they're not the only decision makers. Often politicians will come in at a later stage and sometimes make a mess of things, as they can do in many countries. But overall, I would say that the EU institutions are very open to that sort of two-way process engagement, giving feedback, listening to feedback. And it's sophisticated because it's a big machine, whereas, maybe domestically the whole process isn't as sophisticated because it just hasn't been as big a machine here in Ireland or in other member states.
Now, there's no shortage of stakeholder engagement through the European Commission, but some people will say that that's just purely from an optics perspective. I don't buy that. I mean, both from my days as a politician engaging and, in my kind of current incarnation working with business, I don't think that's true. I think that you find a lot of engagement, meaningful engagement from the Commission. Obviously, if you're coming from one perspective, we'll say in business, there will be other perspectives. There'll be the civil society, the NGOs, environmental concerns, etc. So it's not simply a question of the European Commission taking on board one point of view. They have to take on board a whole range of perspectives, and they have to balance them. And you're not always going to be happy with the outcome. But I do think that there is a genuine process for balancing concerns and contributions and inputs. But of course, everybody isn't going to be happy at the end of the day, and they don't always get it right. What legislator or what policymaker gets it right all the time? They don't. So it's about trying to get the best possible balance, I suppose. Now, Brexit is now a reality for Ireland and the rest of EU member states. But from a regulatory perspective, are we now likely to see an even stricter approach to the implementation of existing regulations or even new policies being introduced? I think we're going to learn a lot about that over the next couple of years. To be honest, it's a bit early to say. On the one hand, there has been a big drive at EU level under the current European Commission, under Jean-Claude Juncker, to reduce red tape and to try to be more business friendly. So bureaucracy has actually reduced. I mean, you don't read about it much in the papers, but it actually has reduced a lot at EU level over the last few years.
Can you give us some examples of that?
Well, right across. So there's a thing called the SME Act, the Small and Medium Sized Business Act, which was introduced under the last Commission, and there's been a real drive to make things like accounting procedures much easier for small businesses. So, there used to be a one-size-fits-all approach that, no matter how big or small a company was, they had to sort of meet all of these strict criteria and standards. That has been relaxed quite a lot for smaller companies. So it's slightly more flexible and easier for small companies to do business. Public procurement rules have been introduced, which make it, or at least are designed to make it, easier to tender for small companies to group together to tender for public contracts. And you can do that across borders now, across the EU. So there's changes happening all the time that are good for business. And I hope that sort of drive continues. But of course, the UK has been an important voice in trying to make that happen. So, you have to always be watchful that with the UK leaving, that the sort of pro-enterprise free market agenda of the EU won't be watered down and taken over by a more protectionist or a more regulation heavy approach. So we have to watch that, and obviously the Irish government, I think, will be very mindful of that, because we'd have often, not always, but often we'd have shared the same position as the UK. So that will be very interesting. But I think, a lot will be determined over the months ahead as the remaining 27 member states will start meeting now frequently without the UK present. We'll start deciding on what the future of Europe looks like, what sort of Europe we want to see. Is it a Europe that's, pro-free trade, that's trying to make its way on the globe, if you like, being an economic hub, or is it going to be more sort of insular and protectionist? My instinct says it'll be more outward looking. We've already seen in the last couple of months since the Brexit vote that the European Union is looking at a new trade agreement with Japan, a new trade agreement with India. So, trying to move on without the UK. And I think that would be very good news for Ireland. It would open up new markets. It would open up new opportunities for Irish companies, big and small. And, we're good at that. So the more opportunities that we can achieve through the EU and through our membership of the EU, the better.
And where do you see the opportunities coming for Ireland through Brexit?
Frankly, I think they're limited. There's a lot of dressing up Brexit, but in reality, I think Brexit is bad news. It's bad news for the European Union, it's bad news for the UK, and it's very bad news for Ireland. We're highly exposed. We've a huge export market in the UK, especially in the food sector, but not just, right across the board. And it disrupts what we have taken for granted for the last 43 years through our joint membership of the European Union and through the single market. So it's bad news. There are opportunities for the attraction of inward investment from the UK. For example, in financial services, everybody is talking about that, but we have capacity issues in Ireland. We have issues around housing, around infrastructure, just the size of the country, and these are significant challenges that really we need to address, and I think the government needs to try and accelerate in addressing. So, while there are opportunities, I think we have to be realistic about the challenges as well. We have to try and make the most of the opportunities, but we also have to prepare ourselves for the challenges that lie ahead, and they are many.
Now, staying on the topic of Brexit, Lucinda, you were also a strategic advisor for Frippery. What is Frippery, and what does this role entail?
So Frippery it's like a larger global version of Vulcan Consulting in a sense. So Frippery is a long-established public affairs company, government relations company. It's a UK company, but with their largest presence in Brussels, and they work for very significant clients all over the world. They would have network members in South Africa, in Canada, and China, as well as across all of the European Union and across North America. So I work with them advising clients on the Brexit implications, preparing for Brexit. There's a team of us that work depending on the company and depending on their particular issues. We have trade experts, we have experts on immigration, we have experts pretty much across the whole spectrum. So we would work in a very tailored way to help companies prepare themselves for Brexit, and also in some instances try to influence the outcome of the negotiations. But that's a challenge.
And looking at our own government for a second, are they taking the threat of Brexit with the seriousness that it demands? And in your opinion, what should they be doing to ensure that Ireland is fully prepared for the potential impact of this landmark event?
I mean, I certainly think the government are active. When I talk to colleagues in the European Council and the European Commission, the Irish government are amongst the most active in terms of engaging with the negotiating team in Brussels, letting them know their concerns. And I think the government has done a good job in communicating the concerns that they have in relation to Brexit and its impact on the economy of Ireland, and also, of course, on the border issue and the potential knock-on effects for the peace process. So those messages have been received loud and clear. I think what's more complicated and what the government has yet to kind of come to terms with is actually providing solutions. So, a lot of people in the other EU member states and indeed in Brussels would say, well, that's fine, and we want to help, and we want to minimise the impact on Ireland. But what can we concretely do? And that's, I think, where the government is struggling. Struggling because it's very, very complex and very difficult. But I think that it's going to be really crucial in the next couple of months. It's really important that there will be solutions coming from the government in Dublin, and not just highlighting the problems, because people's patience, in a sense, will run out, and things will move on, and suddenly we'll find that elements of the exit deal for the UK will have been concluded, and our concerns may not be taken into account. So I think we need to really come with concrete solutions.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.